My name is Arlene. I'm 52 years old, and I thought I knew what generosity looked like until my own daughter taught me otherwise. There I was standing in my living room, surrounded by carefully packed suitcases for what I believed would be the trip of a lifetime. A week-long luxury tour across Europe, just me and my 23-year-old daughter Emma. I had spent months planning every detail from five-star hotels in Paris to private tours of the Colosseum. I thought this would be our chance to reconnect after years of growing apart since her father's remarriage. Little did I know what was waiting for me at the airport pickup. Before I tell you what happened next, please let me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, you won't believe how this trip changed everything between us. The foundation of this story goes back 8 years, when my marriage to Brad fell apart like a house of cards in a thunderstorm. Emma was only 15, then caught in the middle of what became the most bitter custody battle our small Connecticut town had ever witnessed. For 3 years, Brad and I fought over every holiday, every weekend, every school event. The lawyer's bills alone could have funded a small college education. I had built my success in real estate during those tumultuous years, working 18-hour days to provide the stability Emma needed. My brokerage firm specialized in luxury properties along the Connecticut shoreline, and by the time the divorce was finalized, I was earning more in a month than Brad made in 6. He had been struggling ever since the economic downturn hit his construction business, losing client after client until he was barely keeping his head above water. That's when Sophia entered the picture like a tornado in designer heels. She was 29 to his 48, unemployed, but with expensive taste, and she had this remarkable ability to make Brad feel like the successful man he used to be. What she saw in a financially struggling contractor I could never understand, but what Brad saw in her was crystal clear. She represented a fresh start, a chance to forget his failures and play the role of provider again, even if it meant maxing out credit cards to maintain the illusion. Emma, now 23 and fresh out of college with a degree in marketing, had been living with Brad and Sophia for the past 2 years. Every time we spoke, I could hear the subtle changes in her voice, the way she had started parroting Sophia's opinions about everything from politics to which restaurants were worth visiting. It broke my heart to watch my independent, strong-willed daughter slowly morphing into someone I barely recognized. The idea for the European trip came to me during one of our monthly coffee dates, the only consistent contact Emma and I maintained. She mentioned how she had never been outside the United States, how all her college friends were posting pictures from their post-graduation adventures, while she was stuck helping Sophia redecorate their cramped apartment. The longing in her voice was unmistakable, and that night I made a decision that would cost me $25,000 and nearly destroy our relationship. I spent the next 3 months planning every detail with the precision of a military operation. First-class flights to Paris, luxury suites at the Four Seasons Private, guided tours of the Louvre and Versailles, a high-speed train to Rome with accommodations at the Hotel de Russie, then finishing in Barcelona at the Mandarin Oriental with front-row seats to a flamenco show. I researched restaurants, booked spa treatments, even arranged for a professional photographer to capture our memories at each destination. The anticipation kept me awake at night, imagining Emma's face when she saw the Eiffel Tower for the first time, when she tasted authentic gelato in the shadow of the Pantheon, when we watched the sunset over Gaudi's masterpieces. This wasn't just a vacation. This was my chance to reclaim my daughter, to show her that our bond was stronger than whatever influence Sophia had gained over her. The preparation phase consumed every spare moment I had for 12 weeks. I transformed my home office into mission control with printed itineraries, restaurant reservations, and cultural site information organized in color-coded folders. My assistant at the firm started joking that I was planning this trip with more attention to detail than most people put into buying their dream home. Shopping for the trip became its own adventure. I convinced Emma to spend a Saturday afternoon with me at the upscale boutiques in Greenwich, claiming I needed her young perspective on what was fashionable in Europe. We laughed together as I tried on outfit after outfit, and for a few precious hours it felt like we were just a normal mother and daughter preparing for the adventure of a lifetime. During our phone calls, Emma seemed genuinely excited about our plans. She asked detailed questions about each city, researched the museums we would visit, and even started learning basic phrases in French, Italian, and Spanish using a language app. Her enthusiasm felt authentic, and I allowed myself to believe that this trip would mark the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship. I shared our itinerary with friends and colleagues who responded with a mixture of admiration and envy. My business partner Janet kept shaking her head, saying she couldn't believe I was spending that much money on a single week, but I could see the wistful look in her eyes when I described our planned dinner cruise along the Seine. My neighbor Dorothy, whose own daughter lived across the country and rarely visited, told me repeatedly how lucky Emma was to have such a generous mother. The gifts I bought for each destination filled 2 entire drawers in my dresser. A silk scarf from Hermes for our Paris leg Italian leather gloves for Rome, and a beautiful handcrafted fan for our time in Barcelona. I imagined presenting each one to Emma at the perfect moment, creating memories that would last a lifetime. As our departure date approached, my excitement reached fever pitch. I had taken 2 weeks off work, something I hadn't done in 5 years, and delegated all my important clients to other agents. This trip was going to be perfect. A bonding experience that would remind Emma of the strong, loving relationship we had before divorce, and remarriage complicated everything. But then came that phone call that should have been my first warning. Emma asked almost casually whether it was possible to change the name on airline tickets. She framed it as a hypothetical question, claiming she was just curious about airline policies after reading an article online. I explained that it was technically possible but expensive, and the conversation moved on to other topics. In my excitement, I completely missed the significance of that seemingly innocent question. Looking back now, I realize there were other signs I ignored. The way Emma deflected when I asked about her packing progress, how she became vague about which outfits she was planning to bring, and most tellingly, how she started mentioning Sophia more frequently in our conversations about the trip. The morning of our departure, I woke up at 5 o'clock with the kind of nervous energy usually reserved for Christmas morning. Every item on my checklist had been completed twice. Every document had been printed and organized in my leather travel portfolio, and both suitcases sat by my front door like loyal sentinels waiting for their mission to begin. I had arranged to pick up Emma at 8:30, giving us plenty of time to navigate traffic to JFK and check in for our 11:15 flight to Charles de Gaulle. When I called her at 7:30 to confirm our timing, the phone rang straight through to voicemail. No big deal, I told myself. She was probably in the shower or double-checking her luggage one final time. By 8:15, when she still hadn't returned my calls, a small knot of anxiety began forming in my stomach. Emma had always been punctual, especially for important events, and this trip certainly qualified as the most important event we had shared in years. I decided to drive over to Brad's house, figuring it would be easier to communicate in person than play phone tag. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I knew something was wrong. Sophia's bright red Honda Civic was parked in the spot where Emma's car usually sat, and I could see movement behind the living room curtains. The front yard, which Brad had always kept meticulously maintained, showed signs of neglect that spoke to larger problems in his life. Before I could even turn off my engine, the front door opened and Emma emerged carrying a large rolling suitcase and wearing an expression I had never seen before. It was a combination of determination and guilt that immediately set every maternal alarm bell ringing in my head. Behind her, moving with the confident stride of someone who belonged there, came Sophia carrying her own luggage and wearing a smile that made my blood run cold. "Mom," Emma said, avoiding direct eye contact as she approached my car. "I need to tell you something, and I hope you'll understand." The knot in my stomach tightened into a fist as she continued. "I've decided to take Sophia instead. She's never been to Europe, and this might be her only chance to experience something like this." For a moment, the world stopped spinning. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire I couldn't yet see. $25,000 worth of careful planning, 3 months of excited anticipation, and the hope of reconnecting with my daughter all crystallized into this single moment of devastating betrayal. Sophia stepped forward with the kind of manufactured sweetness that made my skin crawl. "I've already packed and I'm so excited," she announced, as if this had been the plan all along. "Thanks for understanding, Arlene. Emma told me how supportive you'd be about this change." Understanding. The word echoed in my mind as I sat there gripping my steering wheel and trying to process what was happening. My daughter, the child I had carried for 9 months and raised for 23 years, had just handed over the most expensive gift I had ever given her to a woman who had contributed nothing but chaos to our family dynamic. Emma shifted uncomfortably under my gaze, clearly expecting some kind of emotional explosion. But something strange happened in that moment. Instead of screaming or crying or demanding explanations, I felt an eerie calm descend over me. Maybe it was shock, or maybe it was the realization that this decision revealed more about Emma's character than any argument ever could. "Have a wonderful time," I heard myself saying in a voice that sounded surprisingly steady. I helped them transfer their luggage to my car, drove them to the airport in complete silence, and watched them disappear into the departure terminal with their boarding passes clutched in their hands like winning lottery tickets. The drive home from JFK felt longer than our planned flight to Paris. My hands remained steady on the steering wheel, but my mind was racing through emotions I couldn't yet name. Hurt, certainly. Anger, absolutely. But underneath those familiar feelings was something else entirely, a cold calculation that surprised me with its clarity. Back in my living room, I sat staring at the 2 first-class boarding passes still lying on my coffee table where I had left them that morning. Each ticket represented roughly $3,000, not counting the accommodations, meals, and experiences I had so carefully arranged. Emma's betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore, it was mathematical. My first call was to Sarah, my travel agent, who had become something of a friend during our months of planning this elaborate itinerary. When I explained the situation, her horrified gasp was exactly the reaction I needed to confirm that my shock was justified. "Arlene, I've been in this business for 20 years, and I have never heard of anything so outrageous," Sarah said, her voice heavy with sympathy. "What do you want to do about the reservations?" What I wanted was to cancel everything and demand refunds, but Sarah quickly explained that most of our bookings were non-refundable at this point. However, she did mention something interesting about the credit cards linked to various hotel and restaurant reservations. Most high-end establishments required a valid card on file for incidentals, and if that card was declined or canceled, it could create immediate complications for the travelers. After hanging up with Sarah, I made my second call to American Express. I explained that I needed to replace my card immediately due to suspected fraudulent activity. The customer service representative was wonderfully efficient, assuring me that a new card with different numbers would be expedited to me within 24 hours and that my current card would be deactivated within the hour. My third call was to the concierge at the Four Seasons in Paris. I explained that there had been a change in my travel plans and that I needed to modify several of the special arrangements I had requested. The wine tasting I had booked for our second evening, the private shopping appointment at Galeries Lafayette, and the couple's massage at their spa, all of which came with hefty price tags, could be canceled with 48 hours' notice. With each phone call, I felt a strange sense of control returning to a situation where I had been rendered completely powerless. Emma had made her choice, and now she would have to live with all the consequences of that choice, not just the pleasant ones she had imagined. Around 3 p.m, my phone buzzed with a text message from Emma. "At the airport now. So excited. Thank you, Mom." The exclamation points felt like tiny daggers, each one emphasizing how completely she had misunderstood what this trip was supposed to mean to both of us. I stared at that message for a long time before typing my response. Have fun. 2 words that carried the weight of 23 years of motherhood, 3 months of planning, and 1 morning of complete devastation. I hit send and then turned off my phone, not ready to deal with whatever messages might follow. That evening, I poured myself a glass of the expensive wine I had been saving for our return celebration and sat in my garden watching the sunset. For the first time in months, my calendar was completely empty. No client meetings, no property showings, no travel preparations. Just silence and the growing realization that sometimes the most expensive gifts we give our children are the lessons they refuse to learn until they have no other choice. The first 24 hours after their departure passed with an eerie quiet that reminded me of the calm before a hurricane. I went about my normal Saturday routine, visiting the farmer's market, catching up on paperwork, and having dinner with my neighbor Dorothy, who asked excitedly about my European adventure. I simply told her there had been a change of plans, leaving out the details that would have had her calling Emma to give her a piece of her mind. Sunday morning brought the first crack in Emma's European fantasy. My phone rang at what would have been early afternoon Paris time, and Emma's voice came through the speaker with a tone I hadn't heard since she was a child who had lost her favorite toy. "Mom, we have a problem," she began, and I could hear Sophia's voice in the background, sharp with frustration. "Sophia's passport expired 2 years ago. They won't let her board the connecting flight to Rome." The irony was almost too perfect. All those months of planning, all those careful arrangements, and the woman who had inserted herself into my daughter's adventure hadn't bothered to check the most basic requirement for international travel. I found myself genuinely curious about how they would handle this crisis. "That's unfortunate," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "What are you planning to do?" "We were hoping," Emma said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice, "that maybe you could wire us some money for an expedited passport. I know it's expensive, but Sophia really wants to see Rome and Barcelona." The audacity took my breath away. Not only had my daughter given away the most generous gift I had ever offered her, but now she expected me to fund additional expenses for a woman who couldn't be bothered to prepare properly for a trip she had essentially stolen. "Emma," I said slowly, "this was your decision to make, and now it's your problem to solve. I'm not sending any money." The silence that followed stretched long enough for me to hear Sophia's voice rising in the background, though I couldn't make out the specific words. When Emma spoke again, her voice carried a note of panic that part of me found satisfying and part of me found heartbreaking. "But Mom, what are we supposed to do? The passport thing will take at least a week, and we're already here." "I suppose you'll figure something out," I replied. "You're both adults." And then I hung up my hands, shaking slightly as I realized I had just drawn a line in the sand that neither of us could cross back over. Monday brought a series of increasingly frantic calls from Emma. Sophia's passport situation had indeed stranded them in Paris, but that was only the beginning of their problems. When they tried to use the credit card on file at the Four Seasons to pay for room service and spa treatments, they discovered that it had been declined. The concierge had been apologetic but firm about their policy regarding invalid payment methods. By Tuesday, Emma was calling from a budget hotel near the Gare du Nord, a far cry from the luxury accommodations I had arranged. Her voice wavered between anger and desperation as she described their situation, sleeping in a room the size of my walk-in closet and surviving on croissants from the train station. "I don't understand why your credit card isn't working," she complained during one particularly difficult conversation. "The hotel said there was some kind of security issue." I could have explained about the replacement card sitting safely in my wallet, but instead I suggested she contact her father for assistance. That suggestion was met with a long pause before Emma admitted that Brad was barely able to cover his own expenses these days, let alone fund an international crisis. Wednesday's call came from Rome, where they had finally managed to travel using Emma's savings account and Sophia's rapidly declining enthusiasm. The budget airline tickets they had purchased were middle seats in the back row, and their hotel was located in a neighborhood that made them nervous to walk around after dark. "This isn't how this trip was supposed to go," Emma said, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I heard genuine regret in her voice, rather than just frustration about the circumstances. "No," I agreed quietly. "It isn't." The breaking point came on Thursday evening with a phone call that started with Emma sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. They had been fined by police in Rome for trying to eat their own food in a public plaza, and between the fine and their rapidly dwindling funds, they didn't have enough money left for their planned trip to Barcelona. "We're going to have to come home early," Emma managed between tears. "Sophia is furious with me, and I just want this whole trip to be over." Hanging up that phone call, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness for the memories that could have been and the relationship that would need serious repair before we could move forward. Emma's early return happened on a Friday afternoon, 2 full days before their original schedule. I was in my office reviewing property listings when I heard her car pull into my driveway, the engine making the same slightly rough sound it had been making for months. Through my window, I watched her sit in the driver's seat for several minutes before finally gathering the courage to approach my front door. When I opened it, the young woman standing on my doorstep looked nothing like the confident person who had walked away from me at the airport 6 days earlier. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled from too many hours in budget airline seats, and her face carried the exhaustion that comes from learning difficult truths about the world and yourself. "How was your trip, sweetheart?" I asked, stepping aside to let her enter. My voice carried no sarcasm, no judgment, just the tone of a mother speaking to her daughter who had clearly been through an ordeal. For a moment, Emma's face crumpled like she was about to cry, but then her jaw set with familiar determination, and I realized she had come here to fight, not to apologize. "Don't act like you don't know exactly how it went," she snapped, dropping her carry-on bag with more force than necessary. "You sabotaged us from the beginning. You canceled your credit card, you changed the hotel reservations, and you left us stranded in a foreign country with no help." The accusation hung between us like a challenge, and I found myself appreciating her directness even as it stung. Emma had always been brave enough to confront problems head-on, a trait she had inherited from me that had served her well in most situations, but was poorly suited for this particular conversation. "I planned and paid for a mother-daughter trip," I replied calmly, settling into my favorite armchair and gesturing for her to sit on the couch across from me. "You decided to give that trip to someone else. Everything that happened after that was a direct result of your choice, not mine." "But you knew Sophia didn't have a valid passport," Emma protested, her voice rising with frustration. "You could have said something." The truth was, I hadn't known about Sophia's passport situation, though I probably should have suspected it given her general approach to responsibility, but more importantly, the passport was just one symptom of a much larger problem that Emma was still refusing to acknowledge. "Even if I had known," I said slowly, "it wasn't my responsibility to check Sophia's travel documents. Just like it wasn't my responsibility to fund her expedited passport, or pay for your emergency accommodation changes, or bail you out when your poor planning created problems with local authorities." Emma's face went through several expressions as she processed what I was saying. Confusion gave way to anger, which gradually transformed into something that looked like the beginning of understanding. "Sophia said you were being vindictive," she said quietly. "She said you were punishing me for choosing her over you." "What do you think?" I asked. For the first time since she had arrived, Emma really looked at me. Not the defensive glance of someone preparing for an argument, but the careful study of someone trying to solve a puzzle that had more pieces than she had originally realized. "I think," she said slowly, "that maybe Sophia was wrong about a lot of things." The conversation that followed was unlike any Emma and I had shared since she was a teenager. It started with her telling me about the trip in detail, not the sanitized version she had shared in her frustrated phone calls, but the real story of two people discovering that a luxury vacation requires more than just showing up with a suitcase and a sense of entitlement. Sophia, it turned out, had approached the entire adventure with the attitude of someone who was owed these experiences rather than someone who was grateful for them. She complained about everything from the thread count of the hotel sheets to the temperature of the coffee, and when their accommodations were downgraded due to payment issues, her behavior became increasingly difficult to tolerate. "She kept saying that you should have planned better," Emma explained, her voice heavy with embarrassment. "Like it was your fault that she didn't have proper documentation, or that we didn't have unlimited funds to solve every problem that came up." But the real revelation came when Emma described what had happened during their final argument in Rome. Sophia had suggested that they call Brad and demand that he force me to wire them money to salvage the rest of their trip. When Emma hesitated, Sophia had accused her of being weak and too dependent on my approval. "That's when I realized," Emma said, tears starting to flow freely, "that she had never cared about the trip itself or spending time with me. She just wanted to prove that she could take something that was meant for you and me. It was all about power and showing off for her social media followers." The social media aspect was particularly painful to learn about. Sophia had been posting constantly throughout their abbreviated adventure, but instead of celebrating the experience itself, her posts focused on criticizing everything that went wrong and positioning herself as the victim of my supposed sabotage. She posted a story before we even left calling it "Europe with my stepdaughter like she was my parent instead of you," Emma continued. "And when things started going badly, she made it sound like you had deliberately set us up to fail." As Emma shared these details, I watched her face transform from defensive anger to genuine shame. She was finally seeing the situation, clearly understanding not just what had happened, but why it had been so hurtful and what it revealed about her judgment and priorities. "Mom, I am so sorry," she whispered, reaching across the space between our chairs to take my hand. I hurt you in a way that I can't take back, and I threw away something beautiful because I let someone else convince me that I deserved more than what you were offering. Her apology was complete and heartfelt, but it was also just the beginning of a much longer conversation about how we had gotten to this point. Emma told me about the subtle ways Sophia had been undermining our relationship for months, suggesting that my generosity came with strings attached, and that I was trying to buy her loyalty rather than earn it. She made me feel guilty for accepting things from you, Emma explained. Like I was betraying Dad by having a close relationship with you, or like I was being shallow for enjoying nice things when he was struggling financially. Understanding the manipulation that had preceded Emma's decision helped explain it, but it didn't excuse it. My daughter was 23 years old, a college graduate with her own opinions and values, and she had made a conscious choice to prioritize someone else's agenda over our relationship. I know sorry isn't enough, Emma said as our conversation wound toward its conclusion. I need to find a way to make this right, even though I know I can't undo what I did. The months that followed Emma's return were a slow, careful process of rebuilding trust and redefining our relationship. She started by taking action rather than just offering words, picking up extra shifts at her part-time job, and saving every dollar to eventually pay me back for the cost of the trip. I told her repeatedly that the money wasn't important, but she insisted that taking responsibility for the financial impact was part of making amends. Our weekly coffee dates resumed, but they were different now. Instead of the polite conversation of two people trying to maintain a connection despite growing apart, we talked honestly about difficult topics. Emma shared stories about her life with Brad and Sophia that revealed a household dynamic I hadn't fully understood, and I opened up about my own struggles with divorce, single parenthood, and the fear of losing my daughter to influences I couldn't control. I think I confused loyalty with love, Emma said during one particularly meaningful conversation. Sophia kept telling me that choosing you over her was a betrayal of Dad, like I had to pick sides in a war that I thought was over. Brad's perspective on the entire situation proved to be more complicated than I had expected. When Emma finally told him the complete story of what had happened in Europe, including Sophia's behavior and attitudes, he was surprisingly supportive of my decision not to bail them out of their problems. Your mother was right to let you handle it yourselves, he told Emma, according to her account. If Sophia wanted to go to Europe, she should have planned properly and paid her own way. The revelation that Brad understood and even approved of my actions was both validating and heartbreaking. It suggested that he too had been seeing changes in Emma's behavior and judgment that concerned him, but felt powerless to address them without seeming to criticize Sophia directly. 6 months after the failed European adventure, I surprised Emma with an envelope containing 2 airline tickets. Not to Europe this time, but to Italy specifically for a more modest but carefully planned week exploring Tuscany and the Italian Riviera. This is for us, I told her as she stared at the tickets with tears in her eyes. Just us, the way it was always supposed to be. That trip became everything our original European adventure should have been. We wandered through vineyards and medieval hill towns, spent hours in art museums discussing the paintings and sculptures, and had long dinners at family-run restaurants where the owners treated us like beloved relatives. Most importantly, we talked. Really talked about everything and nothing, rebuilding the foundation of our relationship one conversation at a time. The ironic postscript to this entire story came 8 months later when Sophia and Brad's relationship finally collapsed under the weight of financial stress and incompatible expectations. Sophia, it turned out, had been looking for a provider rather than a partner, And when it became clear that Brad's resources were limited, she moved on to other opportunities. Emma was relieved rather than surprised by this development. "I think Dad knew it wouldn't last," she told me. "But he needed to figure that out for himself rather than have other people tell him." The experience taught me something valuable about the difference between helping and enabling, between being generous and being taken advantage of, and between loving someone and allowing them to avoid the consequences of their choices. Looking back now, I realize that the most expensive gift I ever gave my daughter wasn't the luxury trip to Europe that she gave away to someone else. It was the lesson about respect, loyalty, and the true meaning of family that she learned by experiencing the consequences of her decision. Sometimes the best education comes not from what we give our children, but from what we refuse to give them when they need to learn difficult truths about themselves and the world. The most important relationships in our lives aren't built on grand gestures or expensive gifts. They're built on mutual respect, genuine appreciation, and the understanding that love requires both giving and receiving in equal measure. Emma and I have that now stronger than it was before, because we both learned that some things are worth fighting for, and some lessons are worth the pain they cost to learn. If you've ever struggled with setting boundaries with family members, or wondered whether tough love is sometimes the most loving choice you can make, I'd love to hear about your experience in the comments below. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about family relationships and the complicated choices we all face, and share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to let the people we love learn from their own mistakes. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the space to grow from their own choices, even when those choices break our hearts. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who truly matter in your life.